2, 1. All right.
Okay.
What have we, as the Jewish people, bequeathed to the world?
An entire way of behavior and life.
All right. So we got behavior,
Yes.
life. Lovely. Can you put that in a museum?
Can you put it in a museum?
Can you put it in a museum?
No.
You could.
No.
No? I mean, just have, I mean, I guess we could call it a library.
A library.
Okay, but I mean, if you were going to make a museum of Judaism, what would you put in it? Where? What's that?
Beautiful
History.
Judaica.
People.
Judaica.
Beautiful Judaica. So
People in a
a
museum.
bunch of silvery
Different
cups.
people in our history that have been.
You put them in a museum?
Yeah, put them in the museum.
You mean-
not the people?
You mean a
that would be
portrait?
Nice, maybe we could.
Idols? You mean
But
like little statues of them?
no, I would hold, pictures. Pictures of those that have been famous in our history from time immemorial that have made a difference
Do you mean pictures of them or
Yeah.
pictures by them?
of them.
Of them.
Yeah.
So portraits of famous Jews.
Yeah.
You don't seem convinced.
No.
Okay, archaeology?
Okay, so we could do archaeology. We can dig up the
And put,
pots
like, yeah,
that our people use,
But what would that tell us about if we only gave to the world
that they use
pots
pots.
pots and pans? That would
No,
not
but
be very
archaeology.
Hold on a
is
second, but look,
structure,
guys.
like-
He said what should give the world.
Right, but look at the comparison. If you were to go into a museum of Rome, what would you expect to see?
Everything.
Archaeology.
No, the artwork, right? I mean, the beautiful statues, the glorious
Yeah.
forms,
Right.
the archaeology showing the structures that they had built, the aqueducts, the technology that they had invented, right? If you were to go into a museum of Greece, much the same. Go into a museum of Egypt,
Yes.
much the same, right? The art and the statuary would just be everywhere. Our museum's a little small,
Yeah.
right? Where's our great artistic representation?
Some
Why
of the
isn't it-
beamers, some
what's
of the work around the bimmer.
Some of the work around the beam, we got some nice woodworking, right?
Judaica?
If you go to certain parts of Israel, you can see some nice stonework in some of the old buildings. It's lovely chiseling, the angles, the graceful curves. But I mean, let's be honest, it's no David. Even though David is ours, we don't have a Michelangelo's David. We don't have Michelangelo's Moses. We don't have a Sistine Chapel. It was all by Michelangelo.
Well, for one thing, we kept getting moved out from country to country. So these kinds of things, these artifacts, we couldn't take with us. We had a beautiful temple, but we couldn't exactly carry it with us when they threw us out. So what we were able to take is our way of behavior and the knowledge that we had of how to live a life, but not stone artifacts. On the other hand, all of those empires that you mentioned are gone and we're still here.
So they left behind lovely art, but they are mostly dust as far as their actual living culture of those empires. Whereas we leave behind very little art, and yet we're still got a pulse, at least. Yes. I still have a pulse, so we're doing okay.
And not only that, we kind of carry behavior of life by wearing tallit, yarmulke, and the remembrance of for men's circumcision, following the Torah and the bar mitzvah of children. So we carry history on us.
But to be fair, and I've seen quite a few different ones, I've never come across a set of tefillin that I said, that's a work of art.
Right.
That ought to be in a museum. That is such a beautiful design. So,
Yes.
yeah, well, it doesn't really work
No.
that way. Are we allowed to work that way? Could we build David?
No.
Or is there some biblical reason that we might?
You're not supposed to make representations.
We're not supposed to make representations?
No, not supposed to.
We're not supposed to make stuff.
We're not representations of God or human forms, or we're not big on art.
We're not big on art. All right. So that is
we build cathedrals in time.
all right. So hold on a second. Let me take your 2 words and then we're going to get to our Torah. Art and Judaica. Is it versus? Is it or? Is it and?
Oh, gosh. versus.
right? I mean, when we make Judaica, if we make candlesticks, is that art or is that not art? Or is it art and Judaica? Or is it only art, but we happen to use it also for burning candles on top of?
Well, some of our work is artistically.
But apparently there's some art that would not be allowed, even if it were Judaicized. Why would we not be, why are we not surprised that we haven't created the statue of David long before Michelangelo put chisel to marble?
It's about great images.
That you would worship, and if we made a statue of David, we might be tempted to bow down.
Who
in
said
reverence.
we'd worship it?
Well, but it says.
You don't see anybody in Florence worshiping the statue of David. No one's offering up all, sacrifices at his feet. No one's putting food in front of him like an altar.
Well, they've got another statue that they do, so maybe if you have a statue,
Well,
people get tempted.
All right, so let's see first of all whether we ever made stuff that would have been considered artistically beautiful in and of itself, that would have belonged in a museum had it been dug up by some archaeologist that stole it from the country and took it back to their home. Let's go ahead and see what we got. So we're in Tetzaveh, which is continuing our construction narrative of the building of the Mishkan and all of its accessories. And we're going to start on chapter 28, which is page 504. And we're going to go ahead and start right from the beginning. And we're going to talk about something that I think most people would agree probably would have been artistically very, very beautiful.
You shall bring forward your brother Aaron with his sons from among the Israelites to serve me as priests. Aaron, Nadav, and Abihu, Eleazar, Itamar, the sons of Aaron. Make sacral vestments for your brother Aaron for dignity and adornment. All
right, so we're making clothes, right? That's what vestments mean.
Right.
It's the fancy way of saying clothes. By the way, the word in Hebrew is clothes, begadim. It's
right.
Not any fancier than that. The translator chose to make it fancy because translators get paid by the syllable. And why are we making these?
Maybe so that we should recognize them that they're the priests.
Why is the Torah saying we're making them?
For dignity and adornment.
All right, for kavod and tiferet,
Ah.
right? For dignity, for honor, and for tiferet, for beauty, right? For adornment.
Clothes make the man.
Apparently so. All right, carry on. Let's see what some of these are going to look like in a few minutes.
Next, you shall instruct all who are skillful, whom I have endowed with the gift of skill, to make Aaron's vestments, for consecrating him to serve me as priest.
Right, notice for a second, if you have the skill to do artistry, where does that skill come from according to Torah? From God, right? It's a God's given skill. Artistry, the skills of the artisan are from God. They're not in opposition to God inherently. That's kind of an important thing, as you're going to see as we go further.
These are the vestments they are to make: a breastpiece, an ephod, a robe, a fringed tunic, a headdress, and a sash. They shall make those sacred vestments for your brother Aaron and his sons for priestly service to me. They, therefore, shall receive the gold, the blue, the purple, and the crimson yarns, and the fine linen. Which, if you remember, was all the stuff we were collecting in last week's parasha, right? When they were talking about the stuff that was being donated. Now we know that what's going to whom to do for what. And all of these types of fabrics and yarns and materials are needed for making the clothing that will be worn by the priests, and in particular by the high priest, the Kohen Gadol. A little more? They shall make the ephod of gold, of blue, purple, and crimson yarns, and of fine twisted linen worked into designs. So this is sort of the torso wear for the high priest. It shall have 2 shoulder pieces attached. They shall be attached at its 2 ends, and the decorated band that is upon it shall be made like it, of 1 piece with it, of gold, of blue, purple, and crimson yarns, and of fine twisted linen. Then take 2 lazuli stones and engrave them on the names of the sons of Israel, 6 of their names on 1 stone, and the names of the remaining 6 on the other stone, in the order of their birth. On the 2 stones you shall make seal engravings, the work of a lapidary, of the names of the sons of Israel. Having bordered them with frames of gold, attach the 2 stones to the shoulder pieces of the ephod as stones for remembrance of the Israelite people, whose names Aaron shall carry upon his 2 shoulder pieces for remembrance before the Lord. All right, so as Aaron goes about his duty, or the high priest in general,
he is spiritually carrying the people of Israel, the nation, right? In order to represent that, they don't just say, now remember, you're carrying everyone. And God doesn't just say, just stick a piece of paper up there, pin it to you like, the teacher pins the note to the kindergartner to send home. No, beautifully sculpted and carved stones are going to be set in fine gold right up there on the shoulders so that they will shine and gleam and adorn the clothing that the high priest is wearing, which itself will be made of this beautiful interwoven multicolored fabric. Pretty, yes?
They're going to be on these beautiful lapis lazuli stones.
Exactly, which is a beautiful blue base color. Exactly. And later on, you'll see that it continues to talk about the breastplate that was made, breastpiece that was made, that had this interwoven fabric with these stones, 12 stones set inside of it, and the gold plate on the forehead, and the sashes, and the what do they call them, breeches, the trousers, and all of these things. And of course, we also know about the gorgeous menorah that was made with this flower motif for the petals and the cups at the top, and of course, the Ark of the Covenant that was also made. Which has the cherubim on top, the beautiful angels. That's quite a lot of artistry, right? What happened? All of that, if you were to walk into a museum, you wouldn't ask, why is this in this museum? You would say, wow, look at what these people made. This is amazing. So what happened to our artistry? Where did it go? It's gone? There are no more Jewish artists, or we're not allowed to be artists?
Why did
Well, that stuff is gone. Yeah, these particular items are long since gone to antiquity.
But we also don't seem to permit it to be done. Or if there was a while there where it was, well, I mean, that's what was The Chosen, where he's an artist and he can't do his work. Chaim Potok's book, because art could be maybe used as, I don't know.
All right, so the rocky road between Judaism and art is where we're going to look. Now, this is, as always, a tiny slice of what is available on this topic, but we need to see why it is that there has been a resistance at different times in Jewish history, and maybe try and figure out what our current attitude should be to this. Now, the underlying theme, of course, of why we don't see a lot of Jewish statuary and why you don't see a lot of Jewish art in the traditional sense that we would expect, you don't see the parallels to the Roman and the Greek and the Egyptian world, is of course because of idolatry, right? For most of antiquity, there was an assumption that if you were making something that took that amount of effort, that was not functional, that it had some additional embellishment, or in and of itself was a freestanding piece of art, why would you invest the time and energy and all of that labor into something other than an object of worship? We're spoiled by decoration. We live in a time when you can buy a $5 painting at a store, like Target or whatever, and because you think it's pretty and you want to stick it on the wall. And $5, what's $5 out of your disposable income? It's not so much. Back then, taking the time to create a piece of art was time that could have been used to actually create food that would be useful to not starve. So the assumption was, if it had art, it was for worship. And since we didn't worship things that were artistic, because that was called idolatry, if you worshiped an artistic representation of something, therefore, we were not allowed. Or, as the Mishnah tries to summarize it for us.
If one finds utensils upon which is the figure of the sun or moon or a dragon, he casts them into the Dead Sea.
All right, so imagine you're walking along, you find a pot, and on the pot, there's a big picture of the sun. What do you do with it? It's not your pot. It's lost. You can't find the owner, so you're not going to return it. What do? What's the Mishnah say? Throw it in the Dead Sea, right? And why are we throwing it in the Dead Sea? Why not the Mediterranean?
Oh,
no one would go to retrieve it.
Exactly, because it'll be gone for good and completely and utterly reduced and destroyed, right? You throw it in the Mediterranean, it might wash back up on the shore. You throw it in the Dead Sea and boom, and no one's diving down in there to get it. Right, this is, remember, before scuba tanks and all of that. Try swimming in the Dead Sea with your eyes open sometimes. See how far you get. Right, it's not a good idea, by the way. Please do not try this at home or on vacation in Israel. Right. So But the presumption is that if there's a sun that's on the outside of this pot, then it must have been an idolatrous pot. If there is a dragon or other mythical creature, it must have been an idolatrous pot, and therefore you would assume that it was used for idolatry, and therefore it has to be abandoned. It has to be destroyed and rendered completely inaccessible for any additional idolatrous use. However, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel is going
Gamliel
to...
says, right,
Mhm.
if it is on precious utensils, they are prohibited. But if upon common utensils, they are permitted.
So if it's a gold pot with a sun on it,
Yeah.
that must have been for idolatry. But if it's a clay pot with a sun on it, what's the alternative?
I can cook in it.
No, but why would I put a sun on a clay pot?
Oh. Yeah, why?
It's pretty.
Oh.
Right?
Oh.
Just decoration. So what he's introducing here is that actually, maybe it is possible that some art is just art and some art is idolatry.
Oh.
And the way we're going to distinguish he is rolling out to us is by how precious must it have been. The more precious, the more likely that it was an object of worship, because you don't waste gold on your soup pot. And the less precious, then it must be just for decoration, and decoration is just decoration. And then you can keep your sun decorated pot. Notice, however, you're only keeping it. You're not making it. If you found it, you're allowed to keep it. But we're going to see that there is a resistance in many different threads of these texts to making it in the first place. Don't worry, we're going to get around this eventually and try and come out to another understanding that's a bit more nuanced, thanks to many changes in our world. But I want you to at least savor the moment, where right now we're only finding art, we're not making it. And even some art we're chucking in the Dead Sea because it could be idolatrous. Now, if you look over in the box on the right, this is sort of a little bit of a foretaste. Anyone know what that list represents? Those are all ancient synagogues. And by ancient, I mean from the 200s up to around the 900s or so, throughout Israel or Syria or Turkey, that all have these artistic representations in them. Dura Europa, by the way, at the bottom, which actually has a depiction of the hand of God as part of their art, is unfortunately one of the casualties of the Syrian war. This is the oldest known synagogue outside the land of Israel, and it dates from around the year 200 of the Common Era, and it has incredible frescoes throughout. The synagogue in the whole city of Dura Europa was buried prior to a Persian attack back in the 250s. And because it got buried, it was preserved all the way up until the modern times. And it really has some gorgeous, gorgeous painting frescoes of Jewish stories on the inside, including one with the hand of God, reaching down out of heaven to help the people, which I think most of us go, you're in a synagogue and there's a picture. First of all, the entire wall is covered with murals of people and stories from the Bible, which most of us, I think, would find a little odd within a sanctuary. And one of the pictures actually shows a physical hand from the clouds. But yes, it was there 1,800 years ago. So we have people making art, some paintings here and other sculptures. So we're going to have to try and reconcile this. We've got a Torah that says these things are made for the Mishkan. And then we have halakha that says stay away from making things or using them, even if there's the hint or whiff of idolatry on them. And then we have archaeological evidence that Jews were making plenty of art. Maybe they never made the David, but they made plenty of art. How are we going to wrestle with all of this, and how do we understand it? All right, well, let's go ahead and get, as we often do, a wonderful summary from Rambam.
It is prohibited to make images for decorative purposes, even though they do not represent false deities, because in Exodus it says, do not make with me gods of silver and gods of gold. This refers even to images of gold and silver, which are intended only for decorative purposes, lest others err and view them as deities.
All right, so what's wrong with making these decorative images?
People might not know it's for decoration. They might actually think it's a representation of God.
Yeah, I put a beautiful, golden sun on my wall, and I think it's pretty. Someone comes in and says, "Oh, you worship the sun god too," and or someone else just says, "You know, that image just inspires me. Clearly, this represents the life force of the earth. And would you mind if I came by on Tuesdays to make an offering?" It wasn't why you made it, but because you made it, it has led to this. Keep going.
It is forbidden to make decorative images of the human form alone.
He means that by like freestanding and
Like a
freestand,
statue.
like a statue.
Yeah. Therefore, it is forbidden to make human images with wood, cement, or stone, I guess meaning not valuable.
Anything,
Right.
anything and everything.
Because up above it said if they were precious metals, something precious is made of, but even if it's made of wood or stone, it's can't be done up. This prohibition applies when the image is protruding. For example, images and sculptures made in a hallway and the like, and the person who makes such an image is liable for lashes.
All right, if you make it, you get flogged. In addition to having the artwork destroyed. Woof, little rough.
Yes.
Tough to be an artist. You thought it was hard to get, recognized in your day. Like, no, I recognize you. Wow. Keep going.
In contrast, it is permitted to make human images that are engraved or painted, that, for example, portraits, whether on wood or on stone, or that are part of a tapestry.
What's going on here? You ever hear the term graven image?
Yeah.
Right? So graven is different than engraven, as the opposite. Right? A graven image doesn't mean it's a bad image. It's a type of working. Right? A graven image is not grave like serious grave. A graven image means it is a raised image, that it is a relief, a bas relief kind of image, or freestanding. And so what the rabbi said is that the Torah prohibited us from making graven images.
In other words, anything with a three-dimensional aspect to it in any way.
Anything with an external three-dimensional aspect.
Right.
Anything with an internal, it doesn't say you can't make those. So you can make an engraven image, but not an graven image. Right? So you just, you have to imagine, if I've got a block of marble, right, I can carve out my David by whacking off all the other pieces. Right? That's a graven image because I have shaped him and he is coming up out of the rock, right? He's protruding, exactly. He's protruding. On the other hand, I can take my block of marble and I can carve in a head, carve in the head, and carve in the arms, and carve in the legs. And it's still going to be horrible because I'm no artist. But it's chiseled into that, or carved like wood, carving into wood, into the wood. That's okay. Right? It's not protruding, it's sunken. The evil one so far as to say that things like signet rings, if they were a sunken image, that's fine. But don't push it into clay, because what happens when you push it into clay and you pull it off? You make the negative image, and now that's going to be protruding because of idolatry. Right? There's this. That's what Rambam is lingering here, is that there is a worry here about idolatry. That if you're making it as some sort of freestanding, protruding, standing out essentially image, that it is possible that someone will come and try to worship such a thing or ascribe to it some divine status. Keep going.
Similarly, it is forbidden to make an image of the sun, the moon, the stars, the constellations, or the angels, as implied by Exodus. Do not make with me gods of silver. That is, do not make images of my servants, those who serve before me on high. This prohibition applies even to pictures on tablets.
All right, so according to this, it would seem, and we're going to get that Rambam does not mean it quite the way it sounds like at first reading from a later commentary from Rambam himself, but at the moment it would seem that drawing a picture of a sun is prohibited. Mm-hmm. Drawing a picture of a star is prohibited. And indeed, that interpretation became more and more common in certain communities until we get in the 20th century, the ruling at the bottom of the page.
The images of animals and other living beings, with the exception of men, and similarly, the images of trees, grasses, and the like, may be fashioned. This applies even to images which protrude.
Right. So, sorry. Let me back up to that. So the Rambam sort of finishes it off by saying, okay, fine. If you want to carve a tree, no problem. If you want to carve a bird, no problem. Don't worship them, obviously, but those things can be carved. It's the astrological type things, or astronomical rather, and the human form that we have to be especially careful about. Okay, and I meant that idea gets eventually built and comes up until what we see from Rab Moshe Feinstein of the 20th century.
A picture that accurately captures what it is supposed to represent should be prohibited once a child reaches the age of chinuch.
All right, so basically the question came to him, can you let your kid draw a picture of the sky? And this is his answer. And the answer is, once the kid's old enough to know what he's doing, once he's reached the age of chinuch, which is education, meaning once he's entered preschool, no.
Oh.
You should no longer let the kid draw a picture of, you can draw a picture of the trees, but don't let him draw a picture of the sun. Why?
Even though most children are not proficient enough in their artwork to produce something that actually looks like the sun, we worry about the educational message imparted by encouraging children to draw that which would be prohibited if they did it properly.
All right, so Moshe Feinstein seems to be of the opinion that a child drawing a picture of the sun is absolutely prohibited because they might come to draw it correctly, which would mean a good artist would absolutely categorically, in his opinion, be prohibited from ever drawing an accurate representation of the sun. A little rough? A little surprising?
Yeah.
Maybe? Have any of you ever seen Jewish paintings and Jewish art that actually depicts things like, the sun in the sky in the background over Jerusalem? Or maybe the story of Jacob and the ladder with the stars up in the sky? Or other, according to this opinion, those are all categorically prohibited.
You can't show the angels walking up and down the ladder, either.
According to this opinion, absolutely prohibited.
Okay.
And yet they exist.
Yeah.
And they existed in antiquity, and they exist throughout the Middle Ages, and they exist, obviously, in the modern world. So what's going on here? Well, part of the answer is, of course, that different communities have a different reading of it. The other answer, of course, is that these particular interpretations are not seeing the whole picture, pardon the pun, because there are parallel commentaries that provide a lot more room for flexibility on this. And that's what we're going to find on the back page. So Rambam, which we just read about whipping someone for making a picture, is now going to give another view, which seems to be completely contradictory to what we just read from Rabbi Moshe Feinstein.
This does not mean a sphere which represents the sun or a hemisphere which represents the moon.
That doesn't mean that you're prohibited from having just, and Rambam just said it's okay, so no one get up and leave, right? So if you've got your pot, right, that you found, remember we talked about that you're going to go throw in the sea. If it's got, that on the outside of it, that's not what's prohibited. Rambam is saying here. Now, remember, he just said a second ago in Mishnah Torah that you can't draw a picture of the sun. But he just said a sphere that is on a utensil is not a problem. So what does he mean when it says don't draw the sun?
Okay.
He explains.
He explained what we're forbidding are the images which the astrologers attribute to the stars.
Mm-hmm.
That is, Saturn is represented as an old dark man of venerable age. Venus is represented as a beautiful maiden adorned with gold. And the sun is represented as a king with a diadem sitting in a chariot. They are falsehoods, and the nature of falsehood is that it will surely spread.
Right. So when he says don't draw a picture of the sun, he doesn't mean the sun, that thing you see up in your sky. He says don't draw a picture of the sun, meaning that artistic representation of the sun that is used as a form of worship. That makes sense. Right. So it'd be like don't make a statue of Apollo. That's the sun in the eyes of the idol worshippers, not don't make your model of the solar system for the science fair. That's perfectly fine, right? If you're going to put a big yellow styrofoam ball on a stick and label it sun, and you're going to put another little ball next to it and label it Mercury, you're doing okay. But if you put a guy in a chariot with a big sparkly crown, and then you put a guy next to him with little running shoes, now we've got a problem. Now we've got a problem. But notice he's still saying, you've got a problem with the guy with the diadem and the guy with the little wing shoes and all of that. We might say, well, what's the problem? I mean, if I'm drawing it deliberately as an artistic representation of what another culture had done, even though I'm not going to worship it and I'm not going to bow down to it, and then why is this a problem just to have hanging around? Rambam gives his explanation at the bottom, by the way. I mean, that last sentence.
Falsehood.
What about falsehood?
Falsehood. Because you may not mean it as that, but eventually enough people see it. Oh, look, he drew Mercury. That's a picture of Mercury. They're the god. Oh, please, you got to get it.
Right.
People might think so because lies spread.
What's the phrase that a lie has spread around the world before truth is out of bed in the morning? Right? It's lies, falsehood. And he's not talking about falsehood in the sense of deliberate deception, but just mistaken ideas have a really powerful way of spreading very, very quickly and very, very pervasively. And what he's saying is, if there's any chance of that spreading, you do not want to make something that opens up that possibility.
And you mentioned it earlier, the Philip Hashem idea that, oh, you believe in the sun god too?
Right.
I didn't know Jews believed in the sun god.
Exactly. I mean, it's just so easy for people to get the wrong idea if they see a representation, which you may consider to be art, but which many others will easily consider to be an object of worthy of worship, a worthy of veneration. So just don't even do it. Just don't even do it.
It's like building a fence around the Torah. As I told my children, the rabbi cannot go into McDonald's to make a phone call, because if he does, people may see him going in McDonald's and may just get the wrong impression. So you may think this is perfectly innocent that you drew the statue of Mercury, the picture of Mercury, but other people seeing it
may think
not
that
see it. Put a fence around, say, don't even do that.
You're not just doing an homage to the old classical sculpture of Greece and Rome. They make the wrong perception, or it's also building a fence around you, which is that were you to make or to have these items in your home, you might come to treat it a little bit worshipfully. I don't know if you've ever seen, there are many people who go off to other parts of the world and they'll come back with souvenirs. This is the little Garuda, that's an Indonesian icon that's used as a good luck charm. Well, it's a spirit. If you hang that in a place of honor in your home, are you going to somewhat, look to it when you are thinking about, I need help with what's happening, I've got a big meeting tomorrow, or I have a little statue, I'll just, touch it on the head when I leave the door each day. It's my good luck charm. I'm not worshiping it. It's just my good luck charm. Does this ever happen to people, you imagine? I'm not asking any hands in the room, but I mean, the idea that I bought it as a decoration, but I sort of kind of knew that it was kind of at one point venerated by some people who sort of thought it might help them with these, fertility issues, prosperity issues, whatever. And even though I don't really believe in that, what harm does it do having it there? And Rambam is saying, don't have it. Don't have it, because you just heading down that road, and it's easy.
It is easy, because someone once told me, put a mezuzah on the dashboard of your car because it will help protect you. That's kind of the same idea, isn't it? It's using it very much the wrong way.
If you treat the mezuzah as though it were only an amulet, indeed, you're turning it into something that it was not intended to be, and quite likely heading down a chain where you are going to
Idolize it.
worship the item itself.
So you can see how that does happen.
It's not as hard as we think to become an idolater. It's actually quite easy sometimes, because we are very, very connected to the physical. It's something we like. We like the tactile. I mean, and as you all described, we've got tons of Judaica that does a good job of giving us that tactical experience. Tactile. Thank you. English. You know, when we wrap ourselves in a talit, when we wear the tefillin, when we are holding the Kiddush cup, right, that does have a powerful symbolic and physical effect upon us. And so we do have certain tendencies. We've directed them in healthy channels, as you know, a psychologist might say, but we have that latent tendency, and you put the wrong object in front of me, and next thing you know, I'm worshiping Saturn. At least that's the argument that Rambam is making. Just to show again that sometimes this is not such an issue, many other medieval commentators have chimed in.
Creating images of celestial bodies to learn astronomy is permitted.
Right, so the Meiri, wonderful scholar from the Middle Ages, said, look, when it says don't make a picture of the sun, that doesn't mean you can't make your map of the solar system. That's not what we're talking about here. If you need to learn astronomy, make a map of the solar system. That's okay. This is perfectly normal. And the tour goes another category as well.
The sun, moon, etc. can be sculpted if made for the public.
All right. So the tour, which is one of the forerunners of the Shulchan Aruch, which eventually comes along, says, look, if you're going to make a big, you know, sculpture of the sun, it's okay if it's in public. Why would being in public be okay? Because you're not going to worship it in front of everyone else, are you?
Oh.
We all know we're not supposed to bow down and worship any sculpture of the sun. But if it's in my house, I might, because it's private. Who's going to see me doing it? Right? And after all, what harm does it do to make a little offering to the sun before my very important trip? Right? I'm about to have a major overseas voyage, and this is really dangerous. Hedge my bets. I'll do a little offering to my own little private sun statue that I've got in my house. But I'm not going to go into the town square and do this, because then everyone will know that I'm crossing the line to idolatry. And so that makes the public space, ironically, safe to have these images, because they won't be worshipped. That there is a natural check within our communities against idolatry, at least publicly, because it's not something that you're going to want to do out in open. Think of it like adultery. It doesn't usually happen in the town square. And therefore, being in the town square is a safe place. Make sense? Maybe? Okay. Onward.
As to worshiping, they worship anything they put their hands on.
These are the non-Jews of the ancient world around the time of the Talmud. So we're talking 300, 400, 500 of the Common Era.
So we ought to.
Basically, they worship anything they can get a hold of.
As to making images for worship, they create only these 3 types of items that are enumerated, which they prize in particular. But as for other figures, they make them only for decoration. All
right, so very important distinction that the Talmud begins to make here, which is, why are we being so specially particular about the sun, the moon, the stars, human forms, and these kinds of things? Why did Rambam say that it's okay to make a statue of a donkey, but not okay to make a statue of a man? And he's saying, look, that's what they make when they make worship. They will worship anything. That is to say, you'll find people who will worship a tree, and you'll find people who will worship a mountain, you'll find people who will worship a donkey. But when they make them, at least according to the Talmud at this time, they're only making certain ones. And so the making of those certain ones are prohibited, but the other ones we can assume are decoration. Which means if you find the pot with a picture of a donkey on, then you know it's okay. Right? Because that's, even if somebody might at some point have worshipped that donkey, you can assume that it's from the majority of items, which would be for decoration only. Make sense? Maybe? Mm-hmm. All right. But what do we notice about their feeling and their experience with the surrounding cultures of the time? If you were to ask a rabbi from the Talmudic period, so these other people who live in this town that are, in the middle of, modern day Iraq, what kind of things do they do spiritually? How would they answer?
They worship anything they get their hands on.
They worship anything they get their hands on, right? I'm not looking for this as a trick question. It would be a rather poor opinion of their non-Jewish neighbors in the ancient Middle East. right? And remember, we're talking the Babylonian Talmud here. We're really talking about the area that was around the Tigris and Euphrates. And at the time, the end stages of the Persian Empire, they're pretty right. They've got statues and worshipful images of just about anything.
Mhm.
And that's kind of, from our perspective, silly.
But we're so different. We don't have these statues. We don't have anything. So it must feel very strange to feel that different in the middle of all these people who are doing all of this. How are we going to keep the Jews different and say, no, don't worship any of that. I don't care what you see them doing. It's not.
Okay.
I mean, even today we have a problem with that.
Okay, which is exactly one of the underlying ideas as well. During this time period when many of these laws are being discussed, when they say, we are afraid of idolatry, we are afraid of falsehood spreading, it's because they saw it next door. Not in their Jewish neighbor next door, maybe, but they definitely saw it in the next door non-Jewish neighbor who was worshiping the sun, and who was worshiping the stars, and who were worshiping the trees and the river and the birds and the bees and everything else in between. And they seemed to just worship all of these items and these different sculptures and natural settings. And by worship, I don't just mean they went, wow, this is a pretty statue. They went, oh, please, mighty statue, and the spirit which is imbued within it, grant me prosperity and health and all the other things that you might ask for.
Hindu's a perfect example.
Actually, Hindu's a rather imperfect example. It's a bit more nuanced than we have time to go into at the moment. And that's a much larger question. But definitely the time period of the rabbis, they were surrounded by people that seemed to really worship the item itself. If you ask most Hindus, they will not say they worship the item itself. That represents something to them.
Right.
But like I said, it's a little bit more complicated than that. But certainly in the ancient world, the belief that we were fighting against were those who believed that the item itself was imbued with divine power.
In addition, the behaviors of the people who were doing this worship were different from the behaviors of the Jews.
And in many ways did not commend themselves to us.
Yeah.
They didn't behave like us in ways that we found quite shocking and immoral.
I mean, not only in their worship behavior, but in
Right,
their
right.
No, just day to day.
behavior. So they're doing guilt, not guilt, but by association.
Mhm.
You know.
So they're seeing some
So don't-
correlations
Yeah,
here.
don't do the idol, because eventually you'll end up doing their behavior as well.
Right, and both of those are pretty bad. However, nevertheless, in the Talmud, we see just a little bit further along a slightly different opinion.
It is known that this form is not worshipped, even if it is the form of Jesus. And it is not necessary to remove part of the form, for only in those times was the form worshipped, and there was suspicion that one would be worshiping idols.
All right, so the Ritva, who's a middle-aged, who's a commentator from the Middle Ages, writing about this section in the Talmud, actually says that nowadays, meaning in the Middle Ages, we don't have to be as careful about all of this. You come across a statue, even a statue of Jesus, he says, you don't have to think this is an idol. You don't have to worry that this has been worshipped. Because in their day, people don't actually worship the idol, don't actually worship the statue. Right? When he was witnessing his Christian neighbors with a statue of Jesus and asking them about it, they didn't say to him that Jesus is in this cross, that this is actually Jesus, or that somehow this item has magical properties in it, that when properly served with the right prayers or the right libations, this object will grant me my boon. He knew from firsthand experience that wasn't the way people treated their objects of veneration in his day and age, and therefore we should not treat all of their objects as though they were idols. Make sense? And if that's true for a statue, even of something they put in their places of worship, then all the more so for the other statues they used just as decoration, clearly as decoration in places that were not used as sites of worship. And if you think, okay, well, yeah, it's just one of those liberal rabbis from the Middle Ages. You know what those guys are like. They're so progressive in the Middle Ages. All the way back in the Talmud, there was already an understanding that not every idolater was an idolater in their heart.
Said Rabbi Yochanan, the Gentiles outside of the land of Israel are not idolaters. Rather, they only observe their ancestral customs.
Right? So Rabbi Yochanan, why do people worship these statues in Greece and Rome and all of these ancient places?
That's what they're taught.
It's what they're taught. It's what their dad did. It's what their mom did. Right? Before you go on a long trip, you make an offering to this god. When somebody is pregnant in the household, you make an offering to that god. It's what you do. It's just the rituals of the community. But do they actually believe in their faith?
No.
What he's saying basically is that no, the vast majority of people who follow idolatrous practices don't actually have idolatrous spirits. They're just doing it as though it were a custom. They're not doing it out of deep religious conviction. And we can say yay, because they're not being idolatrous. And we can also say, yeah, I've seen that happen before, where people are just doing the customs because it's the custom, not because they understand or are truly connected to what it is meant by it. In this particular case, we're quite happy when people downgrade Judaism to just a set of customs, where I'm a little less happy. But all the way back in the time of the Talmud, they recognized that not every idolater was an idolater. Some of them were just part of a culture of idolatry, and they went through the motions because that's what you were supposed to do on that day. That's what you were supposed to do at that time of life. Which would mean that the stuff that they made is not imbued with an idolatrous fervor. That what they made wasn't actually a representation of belief, it was simply a representation of belonging, of being part of this culture, which means that both from the ancient world, and then certainly in the Middle Ages, and definitely in the modern world, how much danger is there of people really worshiping a statue?
It's done every day.
It's done every day? Where?
Catholic Church.
No.
Ritva in the Middle Ages.
Mary.
Well, they know that isn't really Mary. They know it's a representation of Mary, that it's not really Mary there. She's up there with God, but she's not in
Right.
this little
So-
statue.
So-
I'd argue with you, but
Okay.
But you're going to argue with Ritva as well, that,
Yeah.
that they actually do worship the object itself rather than see it as being a symbol which inspires them to something
I think
else.
It's a very fine line. for
Yes.
some folks.
For some folks, of course. For some folks, the Torah is an object of worship rather than a guide to worship and service of God.
True.
There are definitely people that I have met throughout my life that God is so far removed from their center. Their center is the Torah itself. And when that Torah walks around the sanctuary, it is the parade of an idol. That they are, this is my God in book form. And there's some problems with that. When you don't see the Torah as being the portal through which we experience God, but see it as a substitute for experiencing God. And certainly, yes, in other religions, no matter how careful they are of trying to remove idolatry, there will be people, and certainly in those that are less careful about removing idolatry, it might be a bit more common. But the religion itself, the faith itself, as it is taught and as it is meant to be practiced, certainly has discouraged that kind of relationship with the items. And that leads us in the modern world to the question of, okay, so no one's going to walk into my house and see my picture of Mercury on the wall and think I'm worshiping it, right? Winged shoes or not. Is there any remaining reason then why I shouldn't be making it, why I shouldn't be having it? And there's a couple different options, not 100% slam dunk, yes, definitely shouldn't, but things to consider or remember when it comes to art for decorative purposes.
Perhaps after the completion of the work, it will be beautiful, and the artist or those around him might adore the beautiful form so much as to bow to it, even without any divinity in mind, simply for its beauty. And for this reason, it is forbidden to create it.
And China's been-
All right, so again, let's go back to Michelangelo's David. Even for people who don't see any divine, presence within the statue of David, and certainly Michelangelo didn't when he was carving it, there are many that are just overawed by the beauty of the sculpture itself. Is there a point that our awe of the beauty could become wrong? Is it possible to worship the beauty of art too much?
It's possible.
In which ways or because?
I mean, okay, say that statement again so that I can
Is it-
understand.
is
Yeah,
it-
it's
is-
true though, what I'm saying.
Is it possible to worship the beauty of art too much?
Well, yeah, it is absolutely.
Right? And I want to know what that would mean. What does it look
Yeah,
like?
I think it's too much.
Okay, well, what does it mean to worship something?
I mean, you could be looking at a tree and the plants and the problem is when, like, example, like the sceneries outside, like the plants and the trees.
Right.
Okay, people always, like take in those and say, oh my God, this is wonderful. This is
Right.
wonderful." But they forget that the God is the creator.
Okay, so
Instead of
Right.
saying, wow, God's amazing, look what he did, people focus on the creation instead of the creator.
right. So one level is to be so impressed by the beauty of the art, whether it be the natural world or whether it be the created art, that we lose sight of the fact that there is a creator that goes behind it. The other side that I think that what Khatam Sofer is warning against here, and which I don't think I agree with his opinion that means you should never make it, but I do think it's important to bear in mind, is that it is possible for people to worship beauty to such an extent that beauty becomes the goal and that beauty becomes the measure for everything in life. Right? If beauty is it, then that which is beautiful is good, and that which is not beautiful is bad. And that is not a principle by which Judaism teaches us to live by, right? That which is beautiful is not inherently better than that which is not. It is, how does it perform? How does it exist in this world, right? A beautiful villain is still a villain, and an ugly mensch is still a mensch. And we can appreciate the beauty of things in life, and we should appreciate the beauty, but we shouldn't elevate it to being the purpose, the goal, and the measure by which everything is judged.
Now you've done away with the cosmetics industry, the whole clothing.
Well,
I was just saying that too.
Because that is unfortunate. That's exactly what we do. We judge the beauty. That's, who would have thought that you could get from that to here, but and realize that we do that.
Right. And that is one of the reasons, again, and I've mentioned this before, so I'm not going to apologize for repeating it because I want to. One of the reasons why there are so many details in Tetzaveh and Truma and other sections of the Torah about exactly how we do these beautiful things is to let us know that this is the way it needs to be done because this is the way it needs to be done. Don't just be beautiful for the sake of being beautiful, right? Beautiful as an embellishment, what we call hidur mitzvah, is perfectly fine, but it's an embellishment to the mitzvah that allows the mitzvah to be done better, not that replaces the mitzvah, not that supplants the mitzvah as being the goal, right? Having the most gorgeous mezuzah case ever imagined, it costs $5,000, it's made from gold and diamonds and all of that, but you forget what's inside of it, and God, I hope you actually remember to put something inside of it, is not just failing to fulfill the mitzvah, but it is the opposite of the mitzvah, right? You are turning the object into the source of worship. And by worship, it means that which we value and that which we allow to guide ourselves. Right? That's what worship means. And yes, I think we have created a worship of beauty through the cosmetics and through fashion and through plastic surgery and through what your body shape is supposed to look like, and you diet yourself into oblivion and you work out until you got down to 0.00 body fat. And there is a very real danger that comes from the worship of that beauty, of creating it as a standard by which you live, which negates much of what the Torah is trying to teach. On the other hand,
Of course.
Rav Kook gives us another idea.
The desire for the beginnings of an art institution in the land of Israel is, in essence, a sign of life, a sign of hope, salvation, and comfort. Our nation looks well upon the sweet beauty of art, which is expressed through human creativity. However, this relationship is also limited. As we draw close with the left hand, we push away with the right.
Right, which means you need to have a balance, right? Art is a wonderful source of joy, inspiration, and just appreciation of all this world is. But it can also lead us not just to idolatry, which, yes, has mostly been tamed in most of our communities in its rawest forms, but to simply a supplanting of values that are sometimes highlighted in art, you know, whether it be beauty or the nature of the human form or the aggrandizement of wealth that is responsible or necessary for certain types of art. If you create that as being your measure, your worship point, that is detrimental. So Rav Kook, I think, summarizes it very well. There is not just a place, but there is a joy in art in Judaism, but we do have some limits that we keep in place.
I was just gonna say, going back to what we read at the beginning, God had us make for Aaron and his sons this very beautiful vestment, the clothing, with very precious stones and gold on it. But you're saying if we look at it correctly, we're not supposed to worship Aaron and his sons because they looked so beautiful in
Correct.
it, but what they represented.
Exactly. And we don't continue to make it more and more and more beautiful, right? We only make it as described, which is why the details here are so precise. It's not just beauty is good, so make whatever you think is beautiful. It's no, beauty is good, but I'm not going to let you just get crazy in what you do, because otherwise you could be wearing entire gold plate, you know, vestments, and the ark could have been 19 foot long and, you know, had more ornate and more this and more that. No, I'm going to do it just like this. It will be beautiful. But because this was so central, it had to be a beauty of very precise dimensions. And we continue to make sure we have that balance.
As we say, everything in moderation.
Everything in
There is
moderation.
no more moderation.
All right. Thank you very much.
Beauty is skin.
Yeah.